Everybody being here today. It's probably been a while since we've all been together. Exciting time of year for the organization, for the respective staffs. Our scouting staff in particular, excited about the opportunity that's in front of us here in a couple of weeks with the draft. That staff has worked extremely hard. Matt Bazergan, James Lipford, on the college side, and even going back to what's happened here over the past few weeks and months on free agency. The staffs have done a great job. Everybody's put a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of energy. Certainly appreciated. Excited about the start of the offseason program here, kind of kick off football season. We'll see what that brings here starting Monday, but we're excited about where we're headed, and appreciate everybody taking a few minutes here this morning to get together. So I think we'll go ahead and get started.
John, you want to start us off?
Yeah, good morning, Nick. How are you?
Morning, John.
I wanted to ask you for an update on Watson's situation and about trade possibility, just whatever information you can give us, please.
Yeah, I would say I really don't have any comment. I know Cal and ownership put a letter out a few weeks ago just relative to the organizational stance, relative to where we are. So I don't have anything to add other than it's a legal process. We're respectful of the legal process and where that is. So we're focused on today. We're focused on getting ready for the offseason program and getting ready for the draft. So that's where our focus is.
Sarah?
Nick, the last time we talked to us, you said that Deshaun is your quarterback and you don't want to trade him, but have the lawsuits affected at all how teams have approached you about his availability?
Yeah, right now the focus is on the offseason program and getting ready for the draft. So I think that situation is in a legal process and we're respectful of where that is. So we'll leave it there and we'll focus on the things that we can control, which is kind of getting our team ready for the start of the offseason program and getting our group ready for the draft and the opportunities that will be in front of us here, in a couple of weeks. So that's where our focus is.
Aaron Reese?
Nick, you signed Tyrod Taylor in free agency. Why was he kind of a fit for you guys, given the uncertainty you faced at quarterback? Why do you think he was a good person to come in the situation?
Yeah, I'd say generally speaking, when you look at the whole roster construction in the offseason program, what we try to do just at all positions with the entire team is try to identify players that we thought we liked, that may have had some experience with our staff, and that we're looking for the opportunity to compete, to be in a good situation. I want to be in Houston. So he certainly fell into that category like a lot of other players. So, we're excited to start to work with this group whenever that is. And, how it's all going to unfold, like nobody has a crystal ball, but, we just tried to do what we thought was best for the organization, for the team. So that's why we signed the players that we did.
Vanessa?
Hi, Nick. There are obviously a lot of scenarios that could happen, from Deshaun Watson sitting out to Deshaun Watson getting suspended. There could be a trial. How are you planning for those different scenarios, and what are your kind of contingency plans as you look ahead?
Yeah, we're not going to really get into a lot of hypotheticals and a lot of speculation. I'm not really good at that. Maybe somebody else is better than that than me. I mean, if you want to speculate, probably go buy Bitcoin and focus on that. So we're just going to focus on the things that we can control, which is kind of getting ready for the draft and trying to take advantage of the opportunities, continue to add to our team and build our roster. And we'll just take it one day at a time and focus on the things that we can control.
Berman?
Hey, Nick, what are the potential of you drafting up or trading up? And if that's not a possibility, the possibility of moving back to add picks?
Yeah, Mark, it's a great question. I think when you just look at the draft in general, right, there's a multitude of strategies that you can employ. A lot of that is based on resource allocation, and a lot of it is really player driven, right? So when you talk about moving up for a player or moving up in the draft, right, who are you moving up for, right? And what's the cost associated with doing that, right? So in order to move X number of spots, okay, it's going to cost you this, right? So part of our draft, I would say, preparation is look at different scenarios, right? How far could we actually move relative to the resources that we currently have in place, right? So I think the most important thing is always being prepared to pick whenever you're scheduled to pick. And if there's an opportunity to move up or down, we'll be flexible, we'll be open-minded, and we'll just try to make best use of the resources that we have. I would say there's no set formula, Mark, of going up or going down. And it's very player specific and very player driven. So if you feel like you might be at risk of potentially losing a player and there's a player that you really like, okay, maybe it's worth moving 5 or 6 spots And then what's the cost associated with doing that? So again, we're going to have to look at our picks, what we have, what gives us the opportunity to move up. If we want to move down, we think we can move back and acquire the same player. There's some risk involved in that, right? So you try to weigh everything and just try to make a good decision whenever you have to pick.
Brandon.
Hey, Nick, I don't want to speculate, but I do want to ask you honestly. Did you say maybe a month ago or 6 weeks ago believe that Deshaun Watson could have been traded before the draft? And if so, has that changed at all?
I've never said that. I mean, if that was something that someone said, I don't believe I said that. I think the most important thing for us is to do what we think is best for the Houston Texans, and that's what we're going to do.
Ed Werder.
Yeah, Nick, right now I think you're the only team that doesn't have a pick in the top 60, and yet you have this really valuable asset that you may or may not trade or get offers for. How difficult is it to prepare for a draft when you have, you could pick in the top 10 or you may pick 60 or later?
Good question. And quite frankly, not difficult at all. I mean, we've had experience. I've had experience. I mean, we haven't had first and second round picks before. That was the case in New England. I think one year we were picking like 70th or something like that. We didn't have a first or second round pick. We ended up picking 4 players. So again, I think the most important thing is to evaluate the players, have an understanding on the board, top to bottom, and whatever opportunity you have to pick, whenever that is, just be ready to pick the player that you feel most comfortable with. So to answer your question, quite frankly, it's not that difficult. I think we've done a lot of work. We've done a lot of research. Look, we've evaluated the board top to bottom. It's not, well, we don't have a first or second round pick, we're not going to evaluate this group of players. It's kind of irresponsible. But our staff, Lipford, James and his staff, and our area scouts, we've done a lot of work. We've done a lot of information. Again, when you're watching a team, right, you might think, okay, this player is going to get picked in the first however many picks. But when you're watching that team and evaluating that school, it's not like you're not going to go through your evaluation process, right? To say, oh, well, we don't have a first or second round pick. This player's not going to be there, so we're not going to worry about him, right? It's kind of negligent, right, or irresponsible. So quite frankly, it's not that big of a deal. I think it gets made into a bigger deal than the reality of what it is. So whatever our opportunities are, whatever picks we have, we're just going to try to maximize those opportunities.
Terrence.
Hey, Nick. Hey, I just want to ask you questions. How do you proceed or go forward with the uncertainty that you're dealing with at your most important position? And then secondly, you look at a guy like a Tyrod Taylor, and you say he was a good fit. Would he have been a good fit considering, this is a guy who's been a consistent starter pretty much throughout his career. Would he have been a good fit if there weren't this kind of uncertainty with Deshaun at this point?
A couple good questions. We'll kind of work back to front on that. I would say when you look at our team, right? So we went through the offseason. We went through back and evaluated our team, right? And we went through the roster. And I would say specific to the quarterback position, right? There was only one player that was under contract around the team, right? So we were evaluating that position in addition to a multitude of other positions as well, right? So we went through our process. We tried to earmark or identify some players that we thought we liked. I would say in his particular case, he has some experience with coaches on our staff or has some experience, in this type of offense or system. So regardless, like that was a position where, quite frankly, we didn't have very many numbers, right? AJ was a free agent, Josh retired. So when you have one player at any one position on the team, you need more than one person, right? You're going to need more than one person, right? So I think that's kind of how we approached it and just kind of went through our process and evaluated it accordingly.
Ron.
Hey, Nick, when you arrived here, were a guy who had options. As respected as you were around the league, people knew you were going to be a GM soon. And with the issues with the Texans cap situation, the issue with some of the talent and the draft situation with not having any picks in the top 60, how big a role did Deshaun Watson play on your decision to come to Houston?
Look, anytime you make a decision in a professional decision, right, you're going to evaluate every piece of information, right? So there's a lot of things that go into it. And again, whenever you accept a position or start something new, right, you have no idea what's going to be in front of you, right, or what that entails, right? You can just take the information that you have, make a decision and make a choice. I was blessed to have the opportunity to come here to Houston. I'm excited to be here. And, we're just going to take it one day at a time. So again, like, are there challenges? Everybody faces challenges. We all have challenges, right? I would say, just generally speaking, there's a lot bigger challenges in society that are taking place right now than anything really going on from our football team, right? So I think it's important to kind of keep everything in perspective. So again, you look at everything, you assess the information, you make a decision, and you just move forward, right? And look, you're going to face difficult situations, and there's going to be circumstances that come up, and how you deal with those situations ultimately is the most important thing. And that's kind of how our approach has been philosophically. I know that's David's mindset. That's our coaching staff mindset. So like the past, I would say 3 to 4 months have been, quite frankly, like pretty refreshing and invigorating. Like, we've tried to do what we feel is best for our team, try to build a team, try to put together as competitive a team as possible, and try to get ready for the upcoming season. And that's all we really can control, right? So to answer your question, I think those are the things that are relevant, not necessarily like, here are the challenges and here are the things that, like, it looks like it's a real difficult situation. Again, life's full of challenges, right? And how you handle it ultimately determine, the outcome.
Adam Wexler.
Nick, you've mentioned the personnel staff you're working with here a couple of times, James, and that group. They were obviously here before you got here, and you've decided to keep them on it to help you with everything. And yet you've basically done a complete overhaul of the roster and made almost 40 acquisitions. What was the thinking behind keeping those guys in charge of personnel to work with you, and then all the moves that you've made?
Yeah, we've actually made a lot of changes in that area as well. I mean, there's some carryover. There's some, carryover that's been in place, or some people that are still in place. So again, you evaluate everything. You try to assess the information, try to make a good decision across the entire football operation. And that's what we did. So have a lot of confidence in that group, have experience working specifically with James, going back to our background together in New England. So again, there's a lot of factors. It's never one particular thing that goes into making those decisions. It's a good group. It works hard, good, hardworking group. They're smart. And there's been a lot of communication back and forth. And we're trying to put some systems in place. Maybe some things are a little bit different than what they've done previously. But again, we're trying to do is just trying to merge it all together and ultimately arrive at the same point, right? Try to make good decisions for the Houston Texans organization. And really, it's our decision. It's not my decision. It's not David's decision. It's not James's decision. It's our decision organizationally. And once we make a decision, we're going to move forward, understanding, and I would say specific to the draft, right? When we look at that, I mean, we're talking about really a 50-50 proposition, right? So it's a coin flip. So there's some players that are going to come in here that are going to work. There's some other players, for whatever reason, they're not going to work. That's just the nature of what we do, right? And I would say there's a lot of players that we signed, of the however many, 35, 40 players. Some of them might not be here in September, right? So where the roster is currently, it might look a little bit different in September as well. I mean, that's just part of the arc and the ebb and flow of the NFL and the overall roster building. So we're excited about the group of people that are here. The attitude's been great. The energy's been great. And, we're just trying to make as much progress as we can one day at a time and just see where that takes us.
Cody Davis.
Hey, Nick, with the draft coming up, is there a particular position that you guys are prioritizing more over others in order to improve this team with the season coming up?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's always the discussion of, okay, quote unquote need, okay, versus maybe picking the best player, right? So what we've tried to do, successfully or unsuccessfully, what we've tried to do is just create as much competition on the roster as we possibly could, right? So some positions, I don't know, we have like 15 defensive linemen on a team between defensive tackles and the defensive ends, right? So there's 8, 9 linebackers. We have 9 corners, right? So does that prohibit us from maybe taking a player, maybe one of those positions? Not necessarily, right? So you have to assess who that player is that you're evaluating, that you're making a decision on relative to maybe what you have currently in place, and see how that matches up. And maybe there's another position where A may not have as many numbers, or you feel, this player definitively is an upgrade from what we have, or at least we think he is. So we're going to go ahead and select that particular person. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily position specific. I think our focus is just trying to find good football players that are good people, that have the right mindset, that want to come here, that want to work hard, that aren't afraid of competition, that are going to embrace the opportunity in front of them. And ultimately, it's not going to be about what I think. The players are going to ultimately determine how big of a role or who plays, right? So just try to bring as many good players, as many good people into the building, and let the competition sort itself out. I think that's the mindset and that the approach that we're taking, as opposed to, we need to draft this specific position because of this, or we want to take this particular player because of this, right? Because if you do that, it might lead you astray And I think you just want to try to be true to your evaluations of specific, we're talking about the draft, be true to those evaluations, and you've graded the players a certain way. So what you don't want to do is, well, this player at this position, is graded a little bit higher, but we have so many of those players on our team already. Maybe this player's graded a little bit lower, but we don't have as many players. Okay, so you're going to take the player down here, right? You got to be careful about doing that because then it goes against all the work that you put into it, right? So again, it's about just picking the right people for the Texans, the right players, not necessarily a specific position of quote unquote need.
Adam.
Hi, Nick. You guys start your offseason program next week, correct?
The start of the offseason program is scheduled for Monday. That's correct.
Do you expect Deshaun to participate in that?
Well, and this year's no different. It's a voluntary program, right? So players have the option to participate in the program. So it's a case by case basis, and each player will make the choice that they feel is best. What we're going to do is we're going to do what we've done actually the past couple of months. Like the building's been open. We've had a multitude of players that have been in here. They come in the building, they test, they go in the weight room, they work out, they go through their process. So again, whatever players are here that choose to participate, like that's their choice. And we're going to create as good of a working environment for the players as possible. So when they come here, they feel comfortable and they feel like they're improving as a Houston Texan football player. So that's what our focus is going to be on.
John.
Nick, based on what you just said, when the off-season program gets beyond the physical conditioning, and they would usually be on the field, if they're not on the field, how does that affect a new coach, defensive scheme change, and so many new players that you've brought in to just have it virtually?
Yeah, John, look, there's only so much that we control, right? So we'll take advantage of whatever opportunities that we have, whether it's virtual meetings. And then if we do have the opportunity to work with them on the practice field at some point, then we'll embrace that opportunity when it presents itself. So we can only control what we can control. We don't make the rules. We just comply with the rules. And that's what we'll do. So whatever opportunities that we have with the players to try to help them, to try to give them the opportunity so that come training camp, they're in the best position to compete. Like that's what we'll do.
Aaron Reese.
Nick, a lot of the teams you were a part of in New England, it seemed like devoted more resources towards the secondary than pass rush. I know those things kind of work in concert, but as you rebuild this defense, where do you place the most value in terms of, is it more about coverage than rush?
It's all combined, right? So it all works together. Defense is about team defense, right? It's not about one particular player, about one particular position. So it's all works in conjunction with one another, right? So the better front you have, then it's going to help the coverage. The better coverage is going to help the front, right? So again, it's not about like, is one more important than the other, right? It's about team defense, right? There's 11 players on the field and they have to work in conjunction in unison with one another. So that's the best way to play defense, is to have good team defense. You got to be able to do certain things. There are certain areas that hopefully we can improve relative to where we were last year as a team with the Houston Texans. And that's what we're going to try to do.
Vanessa.
Hey, Nick, what are some of the specific qualities that you look for in a player to bring to the Texans?
Oh, great question. So there's certain physical attributes that are going to be important. Those are going to be specific to the position, right? Like their speed, their explosiveness. Again, there's certain things that may be a little bit more relevant physically to whatever position that they're playing. And I would say some of the non-tangible components, which are a little bit harder to measure, right? I would say their mindset, their relative to the team. Do they put the team first? Are they willing to be coached? Are they willing to improve? Can they make corrections? Can they make adjustments? Can they handle a large volume of information? Okay. Can they transition from, one opponent to the next opponent? And can they reduplicate that on a week-to-week basis? I think being able to perform consistently over the course of a long period of time and sustain that level of performance and improve and make adjustments and corrections, those are some of the non-tangible things that are harder to measure, right? That you don't really get the opportunity to see until you actually have them in the building. So there's physical attributes that are important, physical components that are important, and there's some non-tangible, I would say more football trait related things that are just as important that we can't look past, because ultimately some of those things are going to determine how good or not the player is going to be. And I could just speak, not to speak on any particular player in New England, but just on the heels of Edelman's retirement, right? There's a good example of a player who had some physical characteristics, right, but then he also had some non-football traits relative to his work ethic, relative to his mindset, relative to his willingness to improve on a day-to-day basis that made himself into the player that he ultimately became. So again, I'd say we have a lot of people in our roster, in our locker room that have that same sort of mindset and mentality. So those are the things that we're going to try to bring to the fore and see if we can identify in the players in the draft that have some of those qualities. So then they come in here, then we can actually evaluate those and see those.
Sarah?
Nick, what was your mindset as you made changes to the offensive line this offseason?
Again, like just evaluate the team, do what we feel is best, for our organization. So we have some players that were here last year that are returning. We have some players that played last year that are no longer here. So again, just trying to look at everything and just trying to make smart decisions or what we think are best for our team. So that's why, there's a lot of factors. I would say, Sarah, it's like one particular factor that goes into that. There's a multitude of factors that go into those types of things, right? So you have to factor those in, and then you make a decision, and then you just move forward with it.
Brian Bearfield.
Nick, with the way that the COVID protocol is going this year, has it been harder for you all to get out and to be at some of these pro days and to, the scouting combine being the way it is? Has it been harder for you all?
It's a great question, Brian. I wouldn't say it's been harder. I'd say it's probably been just more different, right? Because each team with the pro days specifically, right, you're allowed 3 representatives from your organization, right? And you couldn't have, I would say, one-on-one interaction. I would say normal protocol and course of action would be going to the school the night before, meet with the player, spend some time in the classroom, be able to go through some things, right? And then watch the player work out next day. And then you kind of put together a comprehensive report of like what you saw or what that interaction was like, right? This year it was, okay, show up, watch the player work out and leave, right? So again, it was just different. So you just have to come up with maybe some alternative ways to gather information. And I think our staff has done a good job of that as possible, scouting staff and coaching staff, because we do have the opportunity to interface with these players on a one-on-one basis, kind of like we're doing here right now, right? Like we could have that call. You can get on a call with a player for an hour and go through some of the same things that you would do at the school, right? So you just had to sort of shift your mindset and shift gears a little bit and be flexible with your thinking. And again, you're still trying to arrive at the same endpoint. I would say in addition to the pro day process, when you go back and look at the fall, right, some teams played more games than others, right? So you have a bigger sample on some players relative to others, right? So I wouldn't say it's necessarily made it harder. It's been a little bit different. Yeah, but again, like you just have to trust your process, trust what you're doing, and just try to figure out a way, right, to arrive at the end point so you make a good decision ultimately at the end.
Brandon.
And going back to the player evaluation, when you're evaluating a quarterback that might be available in the mid rounds, are you evaluating that quarterback differently than say you would a quarterback that would be available at the top of the draft? And are you guys looking in that direction at all this year?
Are you talking about anybody specific, Brian? No, I'm just playing. So I would say just
if you have one
any position, Brandon, right? You have certain criteria that you're going to evaluate that player, right? So regardless of their level of performance or their level of play or who they are, you're evaluating them on the same criteria, right? Then you're assigning a numerical grade based on that particular skill set or attribute, right? So then when you compile all that together, the end result might be, okay, this player grades out at this level, right? This player grades out at a different level, right? You're not evaluating them on different metrics. You just maybe have a different endpoint of what you think of the player, right? So what goes into playing one position doesn't necessarily change regardless of where they're picked, right? You're still looking at those same attributes. And then maybe one player at one level, maybe he doesn't have quite all the qualities that you like, but he's got these things that he does pretty well and you feel comfortable. And okay, so we're going to assign a numerical grade because we think it's commensurate with the role that we're projecting, right? So it doesn't necessarily change how you evaluate it. But again, each player has their own skill set and some are more equipped or better in some areas than others. And that's what you have to weigh out. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, and I just wanted to clarify my question from earlier because I think it came off differently than how I intended. It wasn't that did you say that you would trade him, but I was asking, did you believe that Deshaun Watson could be traded before the draft? And if so, has that belief changed at all?
Yeah, again, I'd say kind of go back to what I said earlier. I'm really not going to get into a lot of hypotheticals or kind of speculation. I think the most important thing on all of this, on any particular situation, what we're doing organizationally, we're going to do what ultimately we feel is best for our team.
We have time for three more. Mark Berman.
Nick, you've used free agency extensively to overhaul your roster. How much work could be done between now and draft that could affect what you're thinking in the draft, or is it apples and oranges?
Not necessarily, Mark. Look, it's all tied together. I think when you look at the team right now, so we're at, I think, 78, 79 players, right? So, okay, so you can get to 90, right? So that leaves, call it 10 to 12 spots or 10 to 12 areas, right? If you go beyond that 10 to 12, then it's going to come at the expense of maybe some other player in another position, right? So what you try to do is put the team in place before the draft, and you evaluate where you are, make an assessment, okay? And then go through your draft process and look at, potentially the players that might be available. Let's say we're picking at 67, right? Let's say nothing changes, right? Who's going to be available? And does it necessarily impact by these 78 over here? It might be, but it might not be. Again, you just want to try to pick good football players. Again, I'll use an example, just kind of going back to what we did in New England. So 2-3 years ago, right? So we drafted Damian Harris. I think it was in the 3rd round, right? Because we had a certain grade. When you look at that position, right, we had James White, we had Burkhead, we had Sony Michel, I think we had Brandon Bolden on the team, right? So you're like looking to your question, Mark, you're looking at that position, go, all right, looks like they're in decent shape at that position, right? But when we're looking at the board, you're looking at Damian and going, all right, it's a good football player. We've graded him a certain way. Okay, do we not draft that player because we have these 4 players over here? Not necessarily. Well, we drafted Damian. He basically was inactive as a rookie, right? And then this past year he played, and he was like our leading New England's leading rusher, right? So again, you don't want to be dissuaded by doing something just because you have these X number of players over here. Just try to pick good players with the right traits that fit your program, what you're trying to do. And if it's at the same position where you think you have some duplication, you got to make that call, right? That's the choice that you have to make.
Ron.
Hey, Nick, you've been busy this offseason. I believe you've made about 70.
Not me. It's not about me.
You're right. You all have been busy. About 70 moves you guys have made during the offseason. With all the movement, who do you view as your cornerstone players? Who do you view, if there are any that you have?
Yeah, I think I got the gist of your question, Ron. You were kind of breaking up there a little bit. Again, I don't think, you look at it that way, right? You start to put labels on players. I don't think that's really fair to any particular players, right? Again, our thought process and mindset was to look at our roster, look at our team. And when you look at the players that we've added, most of them, not all, majority of them in that they have 3 to 7 years of experience, right? So they have some level of experience in the league. They've had some level of success wherever the program that they've been, right? So try to create as much competition, present an opportunity in front of them. And again, it's not putting labels on anybody that he's this, he's that. That's not what we're going to be about. So what we're trying to do is build as good a comprehensive team as possible. Whatever that's going to look like, Ron, I don't really know at this point. We know where we are at this point in time. We'll see how the rest of it transpires here kind of once we get started.
Last one for Ed Werder.
Nick, first of all, thanks for spending a half hour with us and educating us on your thought process.
Thanks, Ed. Appreciate it.
What do you see as the 3 or 4 positions of strength in this draft? And do you agree that it's unusual in terms of the number of quarterbacks who are worthy of being selected in the first round, especially high in the first round?
It's a good question, Ed. And you've obviously been doing this a long time as well. Each draft, right, is very cyclical in its nature, right? So each year, certain positions maybe have more numbers and more volume than others, right? That's the way it is every year, right? Sometimes the positions seem like they're the same each year. Sometimes they're different, right? And again, you just have to evaluate the player and then put whatever grade that you think is on it. I would just say not to oversimplify this, right? But again, when you look at the draft history and the draft arc, right, even in the first round, right, you're hoping that it's more certain than it's not, but there's still uncertainty in the first round. And the reality is it's 50-50, right? So if there's 5 of this, 2 of them are going to work and probably 2 or 3 of them aren't, right? Which ones are those? Look, I'm not smart enough to figure it out. Maybe you are, but I'm not, right? But that's going to happen. And when you look around the league, I'd say what's taken place here over the last few months, it's kind of representative of that, right? So again, there's no set formula. There's no okay, this is going to work and here's why. Again, I'm not that smart to be able to tell you who those players are going to be that works with, right? You just try to identify the players, make good decisions. Hopefully you've evaluated them properly, and hopefully you're on the positive side of the ledger more than you are on the negative side of the ledger. Look, every player that you draft is not going to work. Like, for someone to sit here and tell you that it is, it's less than truthful, right? It's just not reality, right? So that's just the reality of what we deal with, right? So try to take advantage of your opportunities. And there's might be some circumstances once the player gets into your program why he does or doesn't work, right? Well, man, there's no way this player is not going to work, but then something happens, he has an injury issue, or it's a bad fit. Okay, then you go back and you evaluate and say, all right, what do we miss? Did we miss something? Okay, and try not to make the same mistake next time, right? So, I mean, I can't tell you like which ones are going to work, but the percentages tell you some of them aren't. And even at the top end of the draft, right? Like, I'm sure if you do the research, I'm sure ESPN's got research everywhere, right? Or whomever, like that'll manifest that. It'll bear itself out, right? I mean, I'm not like making anything up here. So again, the draft's a fun process. I think honestly, it's probably one of the more overhyped processes that's out there. So again, we spend a lot of time on it. Like, everybody's on TV talking about what everybody should do. That's great. That's awesome. Like, we can't get caught up in that. We just got to say, all right, look, we're going to evaluate the players, do what we feel is best for us, and just try to find the right people that we think are going to fit the Houston Texans. And then hopefully it works out and we can coach them and develop them and they make improvement.
Thank you.
All right, that's all.
Yep.
That's all we have time for today.
All right. Thanks, guys and gals. Appreciate everybody's time. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks.